The question that stopped the world. The rain had been falling since morning, turning the schoolyard into a muddy mess. The parents, holding umbrellas and rushing in with their children, barely noticed the tall, thin man standing by the gates. He wore simple clothes, a plain shirt, dark trousers, no jacket. Most people walked past him without a second look. But one teacher glanced twice. She thought she recognized him, but she shook her head. It couldn't be. Why would Sundar Pichai, the CEO of one of the world's biggest companies, be standing outside a small public school in a quiet neighborhood? Inside the school auditorium, parents and teachers were gathering for the Family Day event, a yearly tradition where kids introduced their parents, shared stories, and celebrated the people who raised them. For most children, it was a happy day. But for Emma and Ethan, it was the day they dreaded every year. Emma, the older twin by just 2 minutes, sat on a wooden bench, holding her brother's hand tightly. Her small brown eyes kept darting toward the entrance. Pinner. And quieter, looked down at his worn sneakers. They were clean, but the soles were peeling. Maybe we can just leave before they call us. Ethan whispered. Emma shook her head. We can't run away every year. Maybe this time will be different. She knew it wouldn't be. The other kids' parents were here, laughing, hugging, carrying flowers and balloons. But she and Ethan, they had no one. Mom had passed away 2 years ago. Dad had left long before that. Since then, they had bounced from one foster home to another, never staying long enough to feel safe. And yet today they had a plan. A wild, impossible plan that made Ethan's stomach twist. When the principal began calling students to the stage, the twins waited. Their names were near the end of the list. Every minute that passed made Ethan's heart pound harder. Finally, Emma and Ethan Cooper. The room filled with polite applause as the twins walked to the stage. There was a microphone in front of them, and behind it, a sea of faces, parents holding cameras, teachers smiling, children waving. Would you like to share something about your parents? The principal asked gently. Emma took a deep breath. She looked at Ethan, then at the crowd. Her voice shook at first, but then it grew stronger. We don't have parents, she said. The room went silent, but we have something to ask. Before anyone could react, she turned and pointed to the back of the room. Every head turned to look, and there he was. The tall man at the gate, now standing just inside the door. Sundar Pichai. Ethan's voice joined hers. Mr. Pichai, will you be our dad? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones came out. Someone whispered, is that really him? Teachers exchanged glances. Sundar didn't move at first. His eyes were locked on the twins, and for a moment no one breathed. Finally, he began walking toward the stage. Each step echoed in the quiet room. The twins stood frozen. When he reached them, he knelt down so he was at their eye level. His voice was calm, but there was something in it. Something that made even the adults lean in to hear. Why me? He asked softly. Emma single quotes as chin trembled. Because you're the only one who looked at us like we mattered. There was a long pause. Sundar's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Pain, maybe, or recognition. He opened his mouth to speak, and that's when a man in a dark suit burst into the room, pushing past the crowd. Stop, the man shouted. You can't talk to them. They're not supposed to be here. The twins' faces drained of color. Sundar slowly rose to his feet, his expression shifting from surprise to something sharper. And who, Sundar asked, decided? That? The man hesitated, then glared at the twins. They know why. But the way Ethan's hands shook told Sundar they were hiding something big. And whatever it was about to change everything. Asterisk whispers in the shadows for. A few seconds after the man in the dark suit shouted, the whole room seemed to stop breathing. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the occasional cough, even the restless shuffling of feet all seemed to fade into nothing. Everyone's eyes darted between Sundar, the twins, and the stranger. The children who had been smiling moments earlier now clutched their parents' arms. Sensing the tension in the air, Emma's fingers tightened painfully around Ethan's hand, and he could feel her pulse racing. She had never seen this man before, but something about his eyes, sharp, cold, almost calculating, made her instinctively want to step back. Ethan's mind was spinning, trying to piece together what he meant when he said, "They know." Why? What could they possibly know that would make someone like him try to drag them away in front of an entire school? Sundar, however, didn't flinch. He stood tall, his calmness unsettling to the man in a suit, who had expected to intimidate everyone with his sudden entrance. Sundar's voice, when he finally spoke, carried no anger, but it carried a weight that made the man's jaw tighten. "You've interrupted a school event," Sundar said slowly, choosing each word with care. "And you frightened 2 children. Now, before you go any further, perhaps you should explain yourself." The man's lips curled into something halfway between a smirk and a snarl. "These is their trouble. They've been removed from 3 foster homes in less than a year. You have no idea the kind of problems you're dealing with." A murmur swept through the parents in the audience, a ripple of whispers that made the twins' faces burn with shame. Ethan dropped his gaze to the floor, wishing it would open up and swallow him whole. Emma straightened her shoulders, trying to be braver than she felt. Sundar's eyes, however, didn't leave the man. "And who are you?" "Social services," the man replied shortly. "My job is to keep them from causing more chaos. And right now, that means getting them out of here before they make a bigger scene." He stepped forward, but Sundar took a single step toward him, blocking his way. The room seemed smaller, suddenly, the walls closing in as the tension thickened. "They're children," Sundar said, his voice still low but edged now with something unmistakable, a protective force that dared anyone to challenge it. "Whatever mistakes you think they've made, you don't speak about them like this in front of strangers. If there's an issue, we will talk about it privately." "We?" the man scoffed. "You think because you're whoever you are, you can just involve yourself?" Sundar didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze to the twins. Their faces told him more than any file could. The exhaustion in their eyes, the way they seemed older than their years, the guardedness. That only came from being let down too many times. "Yes," Sundar said at last. "I am involving myself." A wave of surprise moved through the crowd, but before the man could argue, a small voice, Ethan's, broke the silence. "He's lying," Ethan said, his words trembling but clear. "We didn't get kicked out because we were trouble." The man in the suit froze for a fraction of a second, then shot Ethan a glare so sharp it could cut glass. "Don't start this." But Emma, emboldened by her brother's defiance, stepped forward. "They moved us because we saw something. Something we weren't supposed to see." Now the whispers in the room turned into low gasps. Parents glanced at each other, at the principal, at Sundar. The man's face darkened, and he took another step toward the twins. But Sundar's hand rose slightly, stopping him in his tracks. "What? Did you see?" Sundar asked gently, his attention fully on the twins now. Emma's eyes flickered toward the man, then back to Sundar. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We can't say here." "He'll make us disappear." Those last 4 words sent a chill through Sundar's spine. The phrase was too precise, too practiced for children to invent, and the fear in her tone. It was the kind that came from experience, not imagination. The man in the suit suddenly barked. "This is ridiculous. They're making up stories." But Sundar wasn't looking at him anymore. He had already made up his mind. Without breaking eye contact with the twins, he said, "You're coming with me." A sudden stir erupted in the room. The principal tried to intervene, suggesting they take this to her office, but Sundar shook his head slightly. His instincts told him this wasn't just a matter of misunderstanding. This was dangerous, and that's what happened. Just as he motioned for the twins to follow him, the lights in the auditorium flickered. And went out in the darkness. There was a scuffle, hurried footsteps. A chair falling over, a sharp gasp from Emma. When the lights came back on, Ethan was clutching Sundar's arm. But Emma was gone, asterisked the girl in the dark for a moment after. The lights came back on. Sundar couldn't process what had happened. His eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner of the auditorium. But all he saw were startled faces and the stark emptiness where Emma had been standing just seconds earlier. Ethan's small hand clung to his arm. Trembling so hard, Sundar could feel the boy's heartbeat pulsing through his grip. The man in the suit stood near the side door, his expression unreadable, but his breathing just slightly quicker than before. Sundar noticed the faintest smudge of mud on the man's cuff, fresh mud. Not the kind you get from walking in casually, but the kind that comes from moving quickly through the wet schoolyard outside. His mind registered it as a warning. The man was already preparing to leave, and Emma might be with him. Sundar crouched to Ethan's level. When was the last time you saw her? Right before the lights went out, Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. I heard her gasp, and then something covered her mouth. I tried to grab her hand, but he stopped, choking on the words. Sundar's jaw tightened. Around them, the parents began murmuring nervously, some pulling their children closer. The principal was fumbling with her phone, probably calling security or the police. But Sundar knew that by the time an official search began, precious minutes would have been lost. He turned back toward the man in the suit, stepping forward with a precision that made the man instinctively shift back. Where is she? Sundar's tone was calm, but it carried a steel edge, like a locked gate with a warning sign. Don't be ridiculous, the man said, his lips curling. The girl probably wandered off. Kids do that. She didn't wander anywhere. Sundar replied without blinking. You were the only one standing near the exit when the lights came back on. And you're still here instead of helping look for her. Now tell me, is she outside? The man's smirk faltered, just slightly. You have no proof. Then I'll find my own proof, Sundar said, and turned to leave with Ethan in tow. But before they reached the door, Ethan tugged at his sleeve. Mr. Pichai. Wait, I think I know where she is. The boy's voice was still trembling, but there was urgency in his eyes now. Last week, when we were leaving school, we saw him. Ethan glanced at the man in the suit, talking to someone near the old storage building by the playground. We heard him say, no one goes in here anymore. The old storage building. Sundar remembered walking past it earlier that morning. It was small, weathered, and half hidden behind overgrown bushes at the edge of the school property. The paint was peeling from the door, and a heavy padlock hung from the latch dot. Without another word, Sundar broke into a stride, Ethan hurrying beside him. The rain had slowed, but the ground was slick, and their shoes sank into the soft earth. As they made their way toward the far end of the playground, the shouts and voices from the auditorium faded behind them, replaced by the muffled rustle of wet leaves and the distant drip of water from the rooftop as they approached the storage shed. Sundar slowed. Something about the scene felt wrong. The padlock on the door was gone, just dangling open as if it had been hastily unlocked. And from inside the building came the faintest sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like someone's shoe brushing against wood. Ethan's eyes widened. That's her, he whispered. She does that when she's scared. Sundar stepped forward, placing one hand gently on the door. Emma, he called softly. There was a pause, then a muffled voice answered. Help. He pushed the door open slowly, not wanting to startle her. The air inside smelled of gust and damp wood. In the dim light filtering through a cracked window, Sundar saw her. Emma, sitting on the floor, her wrists tied with a rough rope, a strip of cloth loosely knotted around her mouth. Her eyes were wide, but when they met his, relief washed over her face. He was already moving toward her when a shadow shifted behind him. Step away from her. The man's voice came, lower and colder than before. Sundar turned just enough to see him standing in the doorway, something metallic glinting. In his hand, it wasn't a gun, but it was a long, rusted crowbar, heavy enough to do damage. This isn't what you think, the man said, his tone almost mocking. You're about to get yourself into something you can't walk away from. These kids, They've seen things they shouldn't, and if you keep protecting them, you're going to wish you hadn't. Sundar's body was still, but his mind was racing. There were too many questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. Why take the girl in front of witnesses? Why speak so openly about silencing them? Unless this was never about hiding from him. Unless this was about sending a message to someone else. He took a slow step toward Emma, shielding her from the man's view. Whatever they saw, Sundar said, it must be important. Important enough for you to risk doing this here. So, tell me, who are you really working for? The man's grip on the crowbar tightened. His lips parted, as if he were about to answer. But before he could speak, another voice, low, urgent, and unfamiliar, called from outside the shed. Leave him. We have to go, now. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the open door. And in that hesitation, Sundar moved. He grabbed the rope around Emma's wrists and pulled her to her feet, shoving both twins behind him. The man stepped forward once, but then the voice outside shouted again, louder this time, and he turned to go dot as he left. He looked over his shoulder at Sundar. You've just made an enemy you can't see. Then he was gone. Sundar didn't. Wait. He led the twins out of the shed and into the gray daylight, his mind already turning over the man's last words. Because if there was one thing Sundar knew for sure, enemies you couldn't see were the most dangerous of all. Asterisk. The secret they carry at the rain had started again by the time Sundar led the twins away from the shed. A slow, cold drizzle that soaked through their thin clothes and made their steps heavier. He kept one hand on Ethan's shoulder, the other lightly holding Emma's arm, as if afraid either of them might be pulled from him again. Their shoes squelched in the mud, and every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant slam of a door, felt like it could be someone following. He didn't take them back to the auditorium. The crowd, the noise, the questions, all of that would just draw more attention to them. Instead, he steered them toward the far corner of the schoolyard, where a small covered seating area stood empty, except for a cracked wooden bench. They sat there, huddled together against the wind, while Sundar crouched in front of them, searching their faces for any sign of injury. Are you hurt? He asked quietly. Emma shook her head, but Ethan's voice came out in a whisper. She's shaking. I'm fine, Emma insisted, though her eyes darted to the school building, scanning for danger. He didn't hurt me. He just told me to be quiet. Said if I talked, it wouldn't be just me who got hurt. The words made something deep, and Sundar tightened. Children shouldn't know that kind of fear. He took a slow breath. Emma, Ethan, I need you to tell me the truth now. What did you see? Why are they after you? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain pattered against the metal roof above, the rhythm filling the silence between them. Ethan looked at his sister, as if asking for permission. She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Ethan leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. It happened 3 weeks ago. We were living with the Fosters who had that little shop near the bus station. One night, we couldn't sleep, so we went downstairs to get some water. That's when we saw him, the man in the suit, talking to another man in the back room. Emma's eyes grew distant, like she was replaying it in her mind. They had boxes, lots of them. I thought it was just stuff for the store, but then I saw inside one of them when it tipped over. It wasn't food or clothes. It was money. Stacks and stacks of it. Ethan's voice dropped even lower, and they were talking about moving it without the police knowing, about paying someone to look the other way. Sundar's expression hardened. This wasn't just petty theft or a small-time scam. This sounded bigger, riskier, and far more dangerous. Did they see you? Emma nodded slowly. He did. The man in the suit, he looked right at me. And then the next morning, social services came and said we had to move because we weren't fitting in. But that wasn't true. Ethan said quickly, we liked that place. It was the first time in a long time we felt almost normal. The betrayal in his voice was sharp. Sundar understood it too well. Being torn from the one place where you felt safe was a wound that didn't heal easily. He stayed quiet for a long moment, letting the rain mask the sound of his thoughts. This was no coincidence. Whoever that man was, he had influence enough to get the twins moved without questions. And now he was bold enough to try to snatch them in front of a crowd, which meant either he was desperate or he was confident. No one could stop him. You did the right thing by telling me, Sundar said finally, his voice steady. But now you're in real danger. You can't go back to your foster home, and you can't go anywhere without someone you trust. Emma looked at him with a strange mix of hope and fear. But who's going to believe us? We're just kids. I believe you, Sundar said, without hesitation. And that's enough for now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, but before he could unlock it, he paused. The man in his suit had people, maybe even people inside official systems. Calling the wrong person could put the twins at even greater risk. Instead, he stood and looked toward the street beyond the school. Come on, I'm taking you somewhere safe. They walked quickly, Sundar keeping the twins between him and Mira's walls, always watching the edges of the street for any sign of movement. They reached his car, a simple, unmarked sedan, and he ushered them inside, locking the doors as soon as they were in. The drive was quiet at first, the only sound the steady swish of the windshield wipers. Ethan stared out at the blurred city streets while Emma sat upright, as if bracing for something. Sundar glanced at them in the rearview mirror. Where are we going? Ethan finally asked. To someone I trust, Sundar replied. Someone who can help keep you safe until we figure out our next move. But as they neared the quieter side of the city, Sundar's phone buzzed in the queue folder. The screen lit up with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, until he saw the preview of the message. Turn the car around. This isn't your fight, or the next time the lights go out, you won't get both of them back. He kept his expression neutral so the twins wouldn't panic, but inside, his mind was already shifting into another gear. They weren't just being followed, they were being watched in real time. And then, up ahead at the intersection, a black SUV rolled slowly into view. Its windows were tinted, and it stopped just a little too perfectly in their path. Hold. On, Sundar said, tightening his grip on the wheel, because whatever was about to happen next, he knew it would decide whether they made it out together. Asterisk the road that had no way back, the black SUV didn't move. It just sat there in the middle of the intersection, its engine idling low and heavy, almost like it was breathing. Raindrops streaked across its tinted windows, hiding whoever was inside. But Sundar could feel their gaze fixed on his car. The kind of gaze that wasn't casual curiosity. It was deliberate, measuring, deciding. He glanced in the rear view. Mirror. Emma and Ethan were both sitting perfectly still, their small bodies tense, eyes locked on the dark shape ahead. Neither of them spoke, but their silence was louder than any scream. Sundar knew that kind of silence. The kind that came when fear was so complete, so total, that your body forgot how to move. He weighed his options quickly. Reversing would take them back toward the school, which could be crawling with people. From the man in the suit, trying to turn down another street risk getting boxed in. The SUV had chosen this spot for a reason. He tightened his hands on the wheel, took a slow breath, and whispered without looking back, both of you, put your seatbelts on, now. He could hear the faint click of the buckles behind him. He didn't wait. The moment he saw the SUV shift forward slightly, he slammed the gear into reverse, twisted the wheel hard, and shot backward into the narrow side street they had just passed. Tires screeched against wet asphalt, and the twins both gasped. But Sundar didn't slow. The side street was cramped, lined with parked cars and old brick buildings, puddles splashing up against the windows as they sped past. In the mirror, the black SUV was already moving, turning to follow them. Are they chasing us? Ethan's voice cracked as he asked it, even though they all knew the answer. Yes, Sundar said, because lies wouldn't help them now. But we're not going to let them catch us. He took a sharp turn into another alley, one so tight the side mirrors missed the walls by inches. The rain made the ground slick, but he handled the car like he'd done this 100 times before, calculating every angle, anticipating every skid. Behind them, the SUV's engine roared, its driver clearly trying to close the gap. Emma leaned forward between the seats. They won't stop, will they? No, Sundar admitted. Not until they get what they want. Us, she said quietly. The word hit him harder than he expected. They were children, just children. Yet they already understood they were being hunted like something you could own. Take or trade? They burst out of the alley and onto a busier street. The traffic gave Sundar cover, but it also slowed him down. He scanned the shops and buildings ahead, looking for somewhere, anywhere, that could give them a moment to disappear. That's when he saw it, a narrow underground parking entrance, tucked between two tall apartment blocks. Without signaling, he swerved into it, the car dipping steeply into shadow. The sudden darkness made the twins tense, but Sundar was already cutting the headlights and gliding into the far corner of the garage. Out, he said quickly, opening his own door. Stay close to me. They scrambled out, feet splashing in shallow puddles of rainwater pooled on the concrete. Sundar led them toward the stairwell, his ears tuned for the sound of the SUV's engine above. Halfway up the stairs, they heard it, the low growl of the vehicle entering the garage. The sound echoed off the walls, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was. Emma's breathing quickened, but Sundar motioned for silence. They slipped out, through a side exit and into the service corridor of one of the apartment buildings. It was dim, lit by flickering fluorescent lights, and smelled faintly of damp paint. Sundar knew buildings like this, anonymous, labyrinth-like, easy to get lost in. Exactly what they needed. Where are we going now? Ethan whispered. Up. Sundar said. The higher we go, the harder it will be for them to trap us. They climbed quickly, ducking into stairwells, weaving through hallways. Each turn put more distance between them and the sound of the SUV's engine, but Sundar knew that wouldn't last. Whoever was after the twins wasn't just some street-level thug. They had resources, they had reach, and they had a reason. To risk this much in daylight. Finally, they reached the roof. Cold wind whipped at their faces as Sundar pushed open the metal door. The city stretched around them in all directions, gray and wet under the rain. He led the twins toward the far corner, away from the street view, and crouched down so he was level with them. Listen to me. You're going to hear a lot of things in the next few days. Some of it will be true. Most of it will be lies. But no matter what happens, you stay with me. Understand? Both nodded, eyes wide, before Sundar could say more. Voice rose from behind them, the same cold, measured tone from the shed. You're clever, the man in the suit said, stepping out from behind the rooftop ventilation unit. Water dripped from his shoulders, his dark eyes fixed on the twins. But you're still outnumbered. Two more figures appeared from the other side of the roof. Their faces were obscured by hoods, but the way they moved, steady, confident, told Sundar they were professionals. You can make this easy, the man continued, taking a slow step forward. Hand them over and you walk away. No harm done to you. Sundar didn't move. The wind howled around them, carrying the sharp smell of rain-soaked concrete. The twins pressed closer to him, their small hands gripping the back of his coat. And if I don't? Sundar asked, his voice low. The man's smile was thin and humorless. Then you'll understand just how far we're willing to go to protect what they know. The three figures began to close in. Sundar's mind raced. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The only way out was through them. And then, in the distance, a sound cut through the rain. The whirring thump of helicopter blades. Growing louder, the man in the suit's eyes flicked upward, just for a second. That second was all Sundar needed. Asterisk, the choice that changed everything moment the sound of the helicopter blades cut through the storm, everything seemed to shift. The wind that had been biting cold now whipped into sudden turbulence. The rain turning into diagonal sheet that lashed across the rooftop. The noise made voices harder to hear, and for a split second, Everyone on the roof paused, measuring, recalculating, wondering who the helicopter was for. Sundar didn't hesitate. He reached behind him, guiding the twins backward toward the ventilation unit for partial cover. His eyes never left the man in the suit, whose expression had tightened just enough to betray unease. Still think you've got control here. Sundar's voice cut through the pounding rain, steady and deliberate. The man smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Control is a matter of perspective. He flicked 2 fingers toward the hooded figures, and they began to spread out, circling, like wolves. But Sundar had already clocked their movements. Every step they took narrowed their own escape routes. He adjusted his stance, angling himself, so the twins were in the blind spot between him and the closest vent. Emma's hand clung to his sleeve, her knuckles white, while Ethan's jaw was clenched in a way that looked far too old for a boy his age. The helicopter was closer now, its searchlight sweeping across the city, occasionally catching the rooftop in flashes of blinding white. One of the hooded men flinched when the beam hit him, and that was all Sundar needed to confirm. They weren't here to be seen. Whoever they worked for, they operated in shadows, not under the glare of public attention. Last chance. The man in the suit called out over the wind. Walk away, and you live without a target on your back. Stay, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Sundar's answer was quiet but final. Then I guess I'd better get used to looking over my shoulder. What happened next happened fast. One of the hooded figures lunged forward, reaching for Emma, but Sundar stepped into his path, intercepting with a sudden, precise shove that sent the man stumbling into the slick metal casing of an air vent. Ethan scrambled back, pulling Emma. With him, the second hooded figure came from the opposite side, but the roar of the helicopter drowned out his approach until the last second. Sundar pivoted, narrowly dodging the grab, and shoved the twins toward the roof access door. Go! He shouted over the wind. Downstairs now. Emma hesitated for only a heartbeat, then grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him toward the door. Sundar stayed between them and the attackers, every movement deliberate, not to win a fight, but to buy seconds. Seconds were all they needed. The man in the suit was moving now, his coat flaring in the wind as he closed the distance. His eyes locked on Sundar, and for the first time, his voice carried real anger. You don't know who you're protecting. You don't know what they've done. Sundar's gaze was unshaken. I know what's been done to them. And that's enough. The man's hand twitched, signaling the others forward, but before they could move, the helicopter's searchlight locked onto the group, its beam cut through the rain like a blade, holding them in stark white glare. Through the noise, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. Official, commanding. Step away from the children. Hands where we can see them. For a second, the man in the suit's mask of control cracked. He glanced at the helicopter, then at the edge of the roof. His men tensed, ready to move. Sundar recognized it instantly. They weren't going to surrender. They were going to vanish, and they did. In a sudden, coordinated burst, the hooded figures moved toward the far side of the roof, scaling the slick ledge with practiced ease before dropping out of sight into the maze of fire escapes. The man in the suit lingered just long enough to throw Sundar one last look, a look that promised this wasn't over, before following. Then they were gone, swallowed by the rain, and the dark city below. The helicopter hovered, its searchlight still sweeping. The roof access door creaked, and Emma and Ethan emerged again, their faces pale but determined. Sundar crouched down to meet their eyes. It's over, he said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. Emma shook her head. No. It's just starting, isn't it? He managed a faint smile. Yes. But we're starting it together. The helicopter began to pull back, and moments later, uniformed officers emerged onto the roof. They surrounded the 3 of them, checking the twins for injuries, asking quick, urgent questions. Sundar answered what he could, but he kept the most important parts. The money, the corruption, the people involved, for someone he truly trusted. As they were led downstairs, Emma's small voice broke through the noise. So, will you? Sundar glanced down. "All I what? Be our dad?" Ethan asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the echo of their footsteps. The hallway seemed to still around them. Sundar stopped, looking from one twin to the other. In their eyes, he saw everything they'd endured. The fear, the resilience, the stubborn spark of hope that refused to die. He bent down, resting a hand on each of their shoulders. "If you'll have me, then yes." The relief that washed over their faces was immediate, and it hit Sundar harder than he'd expected. They weren't smiling out of convenience or politeness. This was the first time in a long time they believed someone when they said they'd stay. But deep down, Sundar knew the man in the suits worrying was real. They were walking into something bigger than the three of them. Yet, as they stepped out into the rain, the twins at his side, he felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. Because no matter what came next, he wasn't letting go of them. Not now. Not ever. And somewhere watching from the shadows, the man in the suit made a silent promise of his own. This isn't the end.